If you want to use an MCP server, you need to go through an authorized path. We're going to have Shadow MCP, we'll call it. We're passing MCPs around in Slack. I had one person say, oh, we know where all of our MCPs are. They're in we have a document, listing them. So it's like, that's sort of, the chaos that we had with containers 101 before organizations implemented registries and scanning and sort of the necessary controls. That's what's happening right now. So there's a lot of conversation going on right now about how to take what's could be a very highly scaled up challenge of MCP servers and then begin to distill that into a framework that hopefully, fingers crossed, right, we all can talk to from Siri or from Google or from our phones or our cars in a couple of years and just be like, hey Siri, why did my Comcast bill go up by $20? And have Siri call out to Comcast agent and find out what happened and what changed on my bill. Then maybe talk to Comcast.
Hey, welcome to the ScaleKit podcast. I'm Ravi, one of the founders of ScaleKit. ScaleKit is an auth stack for AI applications. Today, we are excited to welcome Shannon. Shannon is one of the co-founders and president of Icon Labs, where he is pioneering enterprise infrastructure for AI agent systems with Obot MCP gateway. Shannon, we are so excited to have you here.
Hi, Ravi. It's great to be here. Thanks for inviting me on the podcast.
Yeah. Before we talk about Obot and Icon Labs, I want to understand your journey. I mean, you have done multiple startups in the past, successful ones at that. I want to understand what your journey has been that led you all the way to starting another company and then going through this hard job again.
Yeah, my wife asks me that sometimes. I've been working as a founder of startups since about 2008. And even before that, I worked for a number of startups since I started my career in the middle of the dot-com boom back around 1999. So I've been working at this for 25 years now, I guess, in different capacities. Since 2008, I've been working with the same group of guys. My co-founders here on Obot and before that on Rancher and Cloud.com. We're all really passionate open source software fans. Like we love building infrastructure tools and platforms that are open source, that anybody can use, that scale. Often there are things that, we kind of see a pretty big change coming to an ecosystem, and we get really excited about that change and start to imagine what would it take to actually make that change happen and realize it. And I think sometimes we're like plumbers. We tend to focus on the underpinning parts of what it takes to bring something around. So our first company, Cloud.com, that Shen and I started back in 2008, was really like the first infrastructure as a service software platform. It was a project called CloudStack. We were founding members of OpenStack Foundation, if you remember that. And really it was like, EC2 and infrastructure as a service is a really cool idea. What if we could create software that allowed you to run your own implementation of that? And that was back in 2008. That was super interesting because it kind of scaled up the idea of virtual machines and scaled to, running some massive systems that we got to be involved in as organizations built public clouds and private clouds. And even today, some of the biggest services in the world still run on CloudStack, which is kind of awesome and amazing. And then, we worked after that on Rancher, which was kind of after that. After Cloud.com was acquired, we started working on Kubernetes and containers. From really the beginning of that ecosystem, we were kind of there when Docker sort of shifted focus and began working on containers. And co-founder Darren Shepard was just a huge container fan, and he couldn't stop talking about it for about 4 months while we were still at Citrix. And we decided, well, that's a good enough reason to kind of step away and start working on something new. And that was an even more awesome journey. Rancher, we eventually built, was a really widely used, still incredibly widely used platform for running Kubernetes at scale and managing Kubernetes for organizations. And so we spent more than 8 years, I think 9 years, working on Rancher, scaling it up. We were bought in 2021, I think, by SUSE. And it was awesome. It's an amazing time for us, just seeing, a project take off like that. And I think in a lot of ways, after the success of Rancher, it's definitely part of, maybe, 2 is enough. Most founding teams can't make it 2 times without wanting to kill each other, but we just still get along reasonably well. And so as we were, kind of deciding about what to do next, we really wanted to work on something new. And so we stepped away, started working on this new project, and eventually that turned into Obot. And so we're right now kind of a lot of that same feeling we had about containers and cloud computing back in the day is sort of how we feel about specifically MCP and what's happening around kind of the connection between AI and data and systems and how that's getting standardized and how that might open up another really interesting expansion of tech and the things that sort of change how we work. So it's really been a great journey for me. I've loved every bit of it.
Yeah, I mean that's wonderful. When you look at the arcs that you've had, right? You built something at an infra layer when the cloud adoption is growing and that is massively successful. And then after that, you took after the container orchestration management or kube management platform again at an infra layer. Again, that was when you're talking about maybe 2015, 2016, that's when that became a huge problem on, hey, how do I orchestrate a huge scale containerization? And you made sure that there is an infra play at that curve. Now we are seeing another curve where, hey, there is an infra layer for agentic applications to have to talk to multiple applications, and an MCP protocol came in last year. And then you're building another infra layer product now for a different arc for the companies and applications that are being built today. So what led you to see MCP as the next growth curve? What drew you to MCP as a protocol?
I think we were drawn initially by, kind of just excitement over LLMs. I think like everyone, as LLMs really became something we were using, the potential, as soon as MCP came around, it was like, okay, maybe there's a standard here that would allow for some interesting opportunities to kind of put this in more people's hands. And that's been really the other big thread, is that everything we've done, we've just always done in open source. We have this real belief that, the first part of starting a new project is to get it out in people's hands. And so we tend to always, our products are always open source projects that are usually much, much more popular in the community, even than they are as enterprise tools. They just kind of take off in the community, and a lot of the biggest users, sometimes we don't even know who they are until, years later. And so one of the things we got excited about with MCP was we were starting to see some, there were some approaches people were taking to publish big registries of them and repos of MCPs, kind of good MCP server repos and Smithery, things like that. And we're like, what does it look like though as a team and an organization if you want to implement something internally that would allow people to find, to, kind of discover the MCPs they should be using, to configure them, to get them available. And as we sort of unpack that, it was pretty obvious that while the current usage is still mostly local MCPs running on people's desktops, connected, to local file systems or scraping websites. The real power from our side was kind of the next version, where you've got MCP servers that are effectively the new interface to applications and are likely being consumed by business users, not just technical engineers. And so as we got excited about that, the idea of, we looked at a couple key questions like, okay, well, as an organization, how am I going to evaluate all these MCPs? How am I going to determine if they're well-written and secure? How am I then going to kind of control access to them, set up governance around them, provide a centralized catalog and repository for them? How am I going to host them? How am I going to host them if I have to host one? Some of these are like single tenant MCP servers. I've got to host one for every user who wants one. Am I going to try to do that? Where am I going to put them? How do I audit them? How do I, kind of put in guardrails if I want to do that? How do I let people try these things? And so we're like, oh, this is the kind of thing we like. It's tricky. There's some multi-tenancy to it. There's an administrative function to it. There's security is a pretty critical part of it. Performance is going to be really important. It kind of touches infrastructure because I'm spinning up MCP servers and shutting them down. At the same time, it's got to be something that feels very consumer centric, because a lot of the people who want to use this are going to be business users who are not comfortable reconfiguring their JSON file inside of something. So it was just like, okay, this is the kind of thing that we like. And so we started working on really the beginning of this year. I mean, it's a solid, 5-6 months of work, kind of working through all the different layers. How do we create something that can host MCP servers? How do we create the registry? How do we proxy the calls to them? How do we inspect those calls? How do we solve how do we run a proxy that's both an MCP server and an MCP and client inside the same element. So there's a lot of interesting technical challenges, and it all led up to kind of the kind of project we liked. So we worked really hard on that most of this year, and then last month we released the open source project and kind of put it out there. And so far it's been I think it's early. I generally think like most MCP development is still kind of working at the local level, but as what we've been really impressed with is how many large organizations that are really excited about MCP as a kind of standardizing layer, as a bedrock for how they're going to communicate with different things are coming to us just in the last month saying, hey, this is just what we were thinking we needed, or we were looking to build something like this. Or even we already started building something like this. Is this really open source? Can we use yours? And so we've had a lot of those kind of conversations the last few weeks, which has been a lot of fun.
Yeah. So you spoke about currently most of the MCP servers being STDIO, but for really, really mass adoption, we need to have that streamable HTTP-based MCP server so that the end users don't have to configure the JSON files or download some Node environment or a Python environment, run some executable locally. You just want to be able to give them a URL and they'll use some sort of an MCP client like how they would use a browser today just to interact with their application. It's actually great from the consumer point of view because now I don't need to be a developer to access some third-party applications. I can just be a normal user. I don't have to know anything. I just need to use a URL and then talk to that application. Like, I don't even have to log into the product. It seems like magic, right?
It really is.
Yeah, I mean, it's a crazy exciting world. But on the other side, for an enterprise developer who is building an MCP server for the product, what are some of the challenges that you think that they need to go through while they're making it as easy as possible for their customers to use a product via MCP?
I mean, the biggest, like as the MCP developer, the biggest challenge is really, I think they start and far and away is building an MCP that actually consistently does what it's supposed to do. I think it's actually quite difficult. Tool calling can be very confusing. There is a lot that needs to be done to understand how to describe the tools correctly. I mean, there's no shortage of really bad MCPs out there that are, kind of open API wrappers and provide very little insight to the LLM in terms of what the tool capabilities are within the MCP server. So number 1, 2, and 3 are all tied around thinking through how you're presenting this to what could be multiple different types of clients, different models, all of which need to, kind of effectively get to the tool you want people to get to when they're trying to do the right action. And the good news is there's no shortage of excellent content out there from people who are on the bleeding edge of MCP development, sharing best practices here. And, we see this very clear, logarithmic decline in the performance of MCP servers when it's given too many tools. We just had somebody on the context this morning, Fred over at Outpick, was showing a bunch of analysis he did that I think really drove this home. And so a lot of, the best practices around MCP development are still, I think they're still a little bit not well known. People are still trying lots of different things. And there's a lot of tools out there that are kind of offering almost like MCP for free. And I think most of them kind of suck, to be honest with you. I've seen most of the things that try to say like, oh, just give us an API or just point us to something, we'll build the MCP. I think one good news is building MCP is not that easy. It absolutely takes intelligence. It takes human intelligence for the most part. And it's an excellent use for all of the engineers we have who are finding themselves with some free time because Claude Code is quite good and the different coding tools are excellent. The payoff from really thinking through what you want an MCP to be able to do, giving it the right tools, providing really excellent layering of those tools so that the logic comes in, providing really good responses when there are errors, all this kind of stuff just makes an enormous difference in the performance of an MCP. So I would say, number one, this is going to be a craft.
Yeah.
Darren has this analogy he's been giving that I think is really good. And he says, my co-founder, Darren Shepard, he talks about, he's like, when websites first came out, I was working at a big company and there was like executives that bought these products that were like, sorry, not websites, when mobile apps, they were like a mobile app in a box. And it was like, take your app and plug it into this mobile app and your website and you'll have a mobile app in less than 3 weeks or less than 3 months. He says, and they were crap, right? They were all generic. They weren't very good. He's like, that's kind of where a lot of the MCPs are right now. So think about what you want this to do, build, extend. And then from there, we're going to learn better patterns. We're going to probably build more MCPs. We're going to be MCPs maybe that are smaller. I think of this a lot with some of the enterprises we're talking to who are looking at things like Salesforce. And it's like, there's a lot of different Salesforce MCPs out there. They are broadly pretty bad. The official ones haven't really landed, but even what's out there in conversation is really big and broad, and it doesn't take into account the fact that everybody uses these tools differently. And so it's much better. The really happy experiences from people I've talked to are the people who've looked and said, I'm not building a Salesforce MCP for someone to connect to. I'm building a forecasting MCP, right, that has some access to things in Salesforce and maybe has some other access to something in business intelligence, but it pulls the right information because I have users who want to do forecasting, or I have users who want to update forecasts or want to be able to query their forecast. Or, here's one that's a sales rep MCP that really focuses on managing your deals and updating your leads and managing the products and your opportunities, right? That's not all of Salesforce. It's not where you should go to do everything, but it really kind of tones in on the types of things so that I talk to my, my account executive supporter who has, or my sales ops assistant who can do specific things for me and does them really well and does them really consistently. And so I think, we may see these MCP servers themselves become more tailored to specific business use cases. At the same time, I think there's going to be a lot of improvement in the ones we see that are, that are popular out there. Things like Gmail MCP. Like, I've seen lots of different Gmail MCPs, and for the most part, they're generally pretty good. Like oddly enough, it's one that OAuth supports pretty naturally. The APIs are pretty good out there. And so most of the time, it does a really good job of finding emails, kind of writing emails for me, drafting things, writing responses. So I think we're going to, we'll see the MCPs get smarter. We'll find that the ability to kind of build more tailored MCPs that understand my users and my business becomes smarter. And then that growth of MCPs is going to lead to a lot of the growth of, client value as we start to shift away from maybe browsers and mobile apps to talking to these things through AI clients.
Yeah, we had Tejas earlier in our Tejas from Pulse MCP on our podcast. He mentioned some of the exact things that you mentioned. Like one of the things that he said is ideally your MCP server should have one tool because you're only doing one job. Don't just ship all your OpenAPI endpoints as different MCP tools because, like you said, right, the performance of the tool selection problem by an LLM goes down logarithmically as you increase the number of tools that you're making available by MCP server. Basically, don't think of it like an engineer, but think of it like a product manager. Consider the experience of your customers and the jobs you want them to do using your MCP server, rather than asking LLM to stitch together the workflow based on whatever Lego bricks that you're making available. So I think that's great advice, Shannon, for the builders of the MCP servers themselves. Now, once they've figured out how to orchestrate and build all this, one of the next biggest problems is the infra layer. How do they deploy them? How do they measure them? How do they monitor them? How do they deploy the observability? So what are your learnings from that point of view? Do you see any similarities to the learnings that they have while building API servers and building observability around API servers? Do you see them in a similar way, or do you think they're different?
There's a lot of yes and no in there. There's some similarities to, I think, monitoring in general, observability in general, security in general, right? When we talk about the security of an MCP server, we're looking at, unauthorized code execution, man-in-the-middle type attacks. So they're not unique, right? They're things we've been seeing since the beginning of the web, and yet they take on slightly different formats, right? They come on to do tool poisoning now. So I think, like so many things, just like with the emergence of cloud computing, we had to rethink security, and we had to rethink, things like identity and authorization. With containers and Kubernetes, it was all, it was amazing. It was like, oh, still have to rethink it because now we've got new things. We need to scan stuff in containers as opposed to, scanning binaries. With MCP servers, they're a little bit different than even APIs because, again, a pretty classic example is I'm launching for, a lot of these MCP servers are really built for single tenancy. So I'm launching an MCP server for each user who wants an MCP server potentially. I could have a multi-tenant MCP server, or I could have a single tenant MCP. So I've got to be thinking about spinning up MCP servers. How long do I keep them running if someone wants it? What if they haven't made a call? Should I, let it run for 6 hours, 6 days? What if it's something that is going to be run as part of an agentic process once every 2 weeks? How do I know that as the operator of an MCP if I'm spinning up an MCP just for one user? If it was used once, does that mean I have to keep it forever? Does that, should there be policy around the operations of deploying and reclaiming these resources attached to the MCPs? Can I run them in a serverless type way to maybe have them sit as a low resource container that then gets instantiated when I need more capacity? So operations of just, I'm going to centralize running all these because I want to make them all available. I want to put them behind my access control policies, right? I want, first and foremost, I need to implement some security and governance around MCP adoption. Today, MCPs are getting used in every single financial services company, in every Fortune 500 company. Someone is out there running local clients, running MCPs, putting API keys directly into them and calling on because you've given them API keys. So they're using these things. So until organizations say, hold on, no, if you want to use an MCP server, you need to go through an authorized path. We're going to have Shadow MCP, we'll call it. We're passing MCPs around in Slack. I had one person say, oh, we know where all of our MCPs are. They're in a, we have a document, listing them. And so it's like, that's sort of, the chaos that we had with containers 101 before organizations implemented registries and scanning and sort of the necessary controls. That's what's happening right now with tools like Obot. It's like, okay, we want to centralize everything. We're going to give you MCP servers. You can bring your own, but you need to bring them and register them here and let us run them for you. Let us scan them or review them and make sure they're secure. Then once we have them and they're in the catalog, then we can define access. Everyone should know about this MCP service? Is this just for engineering? Is it just for marketing? Is it maybe even more granular than that? Are there some tools in this MCP that are read that anybody can use, but there's some write ones that we want to control access to? So do we want to get really granular down to saying what MCP servers and which functions within those MCP servers are pushed? Do we require, some marketing user to need an API key to get into an MCP server to talk to a system, or should we be using OAuth? I think OAuth is a much better answer for most people that are not technical, are not, comfortable with API keys and secrets and managing things like that. So there's a lot that goes into just thinking about, we want to centralize the operations. We want to centralize access control. We would like to integrate this with Okta or Entra so that, our existing groups, our existing roles can be used to map to a set of MCP capabilities. So creating a bundle of MCPs that are for marketing that then are mapped to a role in Okta. Seems like these were kind of requirements that we were hearing from users and we implemented in Obot because they just seemed pretty natural. I don't think it was rocket science to think, we should define access controls that work with our existing identity systems. And then from there, it just kind of pushes on into the next bits, which is like, okay, well, how do I discover these MCP servers? How do I figure out what they do? For an engineer, it's one thing to say, like, here's all your MCP servers, click on it, now get into the tools, review the tools, here's the docs, go read the doc. For a marketer, they may not want be able to differentiate. A lot of those tools are written pretty technically. So do we need to, maybe even abstract the tools completely away and leave them with, sort of an MCP server that's job is to recommend tools or to, understand what they're looking for and recommend. So there's a lot of conversation going on right now about how to take what's could be a very highly scaled up challenge of MCP servers and then begin to distill that into a framework that hopefully, fingers crossed, right, we all can talk to from Siri or from Google or from our phones or our cars in a couple of years and just be like, oh, why, hey Siri, why did my Comcast bill go up by $20? And have Siri call out to, know to call out to Comcast agent and find out what happened and what changed on my bill and come back and me to then maybe talk to Comcast, well, Comcast, can you give me a better price? Because I'm leaving if not. Or maybe say, Siri, go find me any other options. Like I need a better price on my internet and call anybody who can give it to me at my house and figure out what we can get a price for. Like those are the things that feel like we're totally, my Siri actually, those are the things that I get really excited about because I think they're not that far away. MCPs and MCPs as agents seem to unlock the potential for me to pretty quickly switch back and forth between talking to my personal assistant and talking to a personal assistant provided to me by a vendor or, by the internet or the community or whomever. So I'm pretty excited about sort of how this is unpacking. MCP was sort of a pretty critical layer. If we didn't have a standardization, it was really hard to see how we were going to get beyond just the direct API integrations that things like LangChain and stuff allow us. Now, I think a lot of that complexity is actually going to start to wash away. And we're going to start using things like MCP as just a very standard, probably see the protocol expand to do more and more things that are agentic. And hopefully, the MCP protocol will be how we talk agent to agent as well, or human to agent to human or something on the other end.
Yeah. You brought up a couple of great points, Shannon. Like you touched upon the needs of an enterprise organization, like how in the previous model, I mean, maybe it's still the current model, which is there's a huge problem with the shadow IT where the IT team doesn't even know which employee is accessing what product unless they're brought into the central umbrella under their Okta or Microsoft Entra, etc. Now they have no clue about which employee is using what MCP server and what that MCP server is doing to their enterprise corporate data. That is the enterprise side of the operational problems of creating a central gateway for and then orchestrating from one central place so that IT team stays in control. And on the personal side, what if the likes of Siri or Google Assistant to have these access to these different MCP servers and then have them actually do the real world tasks by just talking to your phone or talking to your Amazon Echo device at your home. That's a brilliant world. And like you pointed out, MCP is actually making the whole connecting these different parts of system easy in a standardized manner. Maybe would have eventually gotten there without MCP2, but then MCP just accelerated the whole process of bringing these systems together in a more clear and natural manner. It's a great thing. So Shannon, moving on to the next item, you as part of Obot have seen a lot of MCP servers, like you said, some written extremely poorly, some written very well. What are the main characteristics of a great MCP server from your vantage point?
I think it's clarity of purpose. Like the main characteristics is a very clear purpose of what you're trying to do, and really spending the engineering time to write definitions of tools that are logical and really well documented for the LLM to consume, so that the clients actually understand what tools are available to them and when to call those tools. We're having the next MCP Dev Summit in October, about a month, out in London, and I'm super excited because one of the single most commonly proposed topics was really around tool calling, and it was about how to improve tool calling. And there are lots of proposals. So I mean, as we went through, Tadas, who you mentioned, he and I, there was a bunch of us who've been reviewing speaking proposals, and we were like, gosh, if we took all of the talks about sort of improving tool calling, we would have filled up the whole day with just tool calling talks, because I think this is an area that everyone is interested in working on, and I'm very excited to see that. There's people who are vectorizing tools, and there's people who are using GraphQL to map tools. There are all sorts of different things. I am eager to see what comes out of that, and eager to see, kind of improved tools that are, really purpose built. A couple weeks ago, I was getting ready for AI4 conference in Vegas, and I was just messing around with vibe coding an MCP server that was a game. And I was like, oh, how would I do an MCP server that was a game? And I wanted to create an MCP server that could maintain state. And so I had to basically bundle in a database that would maintain state and sort of, as I went through this little game I was trying to build where you kind of controlled a robot out exploring a post-apocalyptic Los Angeles. And I was like, oh, well, it's got to know if it found something and what it might find there. And just, I'm very excited about what we can do with this technology. It feels like there's no shortage of interesting projects that are going to kind of emerge over the next year or two as people build MCPs that can fit into our lives and fit the holes we actually have. What do I want? I want a travel MCP that's really good, like a really good one. I want one for my financial services apps to be able to hey, I'm super excited about MCP UI. I want to be able to show me my last 5 transactions so I can, put, oh, that might be fraud. I don't know what that is. So I'm just excited to see how this layer kind of becomes more robust, incorporates more user-specific capabilities, and becomes something that, we almost think of like a mobile app. Like it's the interface to our information, our capabilities, our applications. And so, we expose things through APIs for systems. We expose them through apps and websites for people. Now I think we're going to expose them through MCPs for, chat and for, discussion and for engagement.
Yeah. So you spoke about the MCP and the evolution. Where do you see the spec itself evolving over the next 12 months? And I know we've been talking about MCP as if it existed for the last 10 years, but it's not even been 10 months. And it already has gone through a great evolution, like starting from protocols from HTTP.io all the way to streamable HTTP, from no auth to OAuth, etc., etc. Like, what are you most excited about some of the upcoming proposal changes in the MCP?
I'm really excited about two things personally. Like, one, we kind of touched on a minute ago, which is MCP UI. I'm excited about the idea of a new extension to the protocol having a natural home. And I look at something like MCP UI and I can imagine that becoming a part of the protocol and becoming something that becomes a standard that all clients support and allows us MCP developers to create richer and more exciting MCP services. So I like the idea that the protocol can expand up through the user experience. The other area that I'm quite excited about is the idea of MCPs as agents. Like, I really buy this idea that the difference between an MCP server and an agent is really not a lot. It's the ability for an MCP server to have, an LLM. It's that it self calls, and it makes too much sense to me. Like, if I am Target, right, and I want to expose my shopping experience to someone who's surfing the web via ChatGPT or some other chat client, I really want two things. One, I want consistency. So I want consistency of voice. That means I want to control the prompt that is sort of interfacing with my MCP. I want to choose the LLM that I'm going to use to respond and work with my tools on the back end. I want to test tool compatibility. And so I really think that the MCP server is going to become, the agent, and the agent is going to have, a system prompt written by the MCP developer. And I think that the handshake between the existing client and the MCP server is going to have to expand in how we talk about it, so that at some point, if I'm talking to Siri and now I want to talk to Target, I don't necessarily want to tell Siri to talk to Target. I actually just want to talk to Target, and I want to be able to say, hey, let me talk to Target. And so I can then engage directly with that and almost, kind of push my existing system protocol, my system prompt over to the side and be engaging directly with. So I think there's a lot of interesting things about that. And I think if I'm Target, I really want to invest in that agent, because I want to be able to, connect with a person who's maybe, shopping via Jarvis, right, in the future. And I'm like, oh, I need a new, bathroom rug, and they want to put them all up there, dynamically generate some UI so I can see them and look at the price and when I can get them and pick the one I want and get it ordered and never leave my Jarvis screen, my new browser of whatever it is, whatever the future client looks like. But I don't really want a Target client any more than I really want a Target app. I mean, it's not that the Target app isn't okay, it's fine. But I generally I would rather go to a website than go to Target's app. And I feel that's how it's going to be with the agents as well. So I just want to talk to Target. I don't want to have to get into their specific app and talk to their specific agent via their specific chatbot. It just doesn't really feel the way I'm hoping this thing plays out.
Yeah, it's very interesting. It's sort of a unified gateway to every possible interface or every connected application out there, rather than having to jump to their specific lane to get the work done. That's a great theory. So how does that evolve into the next steps of Obot as a gateway?
Well, I don't know if Obot has to conquer all of that. We got more than enough to handle on helping enterprise adopt MCP. I know from our side, we're going to keep pushing into trying to build more open source frameworks for expanding agents. One of the things that happened in Kubernetes was, we introduced it like a couple years into the Kubernetes journey. We had this custom resource definitions capability that if anybody worked in Kubernetes, it allowed you to sort of leverage Kubernetes orchestration for whatever purpose you wanted. And you could kind of define a resource and leverage a lot of what Kubernetes did. And I think that, that was really critical to the rise of Kubernetes as almost a universal orchestrator for things. And I think you could certainly imagine the MCP protocol offering some type of, way for people to expand upon the protocol with pluggable modules that then, would be standardized between the client and the endpoint. So as we look at agent to agent communication or agent via chatbot communication, all sorts of different things, I think there's just a lot of opportunity for the protocol to become a little more expansive and a little more pluggable. And certainly I know Darren, my co-founder Darren, he's always kind of pushing for how do we bring more capability into the agent? So he's been working on a new project that he was just showing me this week that is really kind of pushes the boundaries of what's the difference between, like, why do I need an agentic architecture versus an MCP server? Can I just combine that all into one thing? And there's this MCP agent project that we had on the context, our live stream about the MCP. We had them on a couple weeks ago, and I was like, oh, I see the direction that's going. So I just think there's a lot to push in that way for MCP.
Yeah. So one last question, Shannon. If there is one thing that you would advise developers and architects thinking about this transition from web applications and APIs to making their product agentic ready, how do you advise them to think about it? Do you ask them to think about MCP, A2A, whatever protocols that are out there? What is a mental model that they should think about to make the product evolve into the modern AI world?
Well, I think there's maybe I can say two things. I think on the one hand, organizations that try to understand the uses that their clients or their employees or their partners, or whoever they're building software for, that understand those users' needs really well, I think tend to build much better things than people who seem to be doing AI for just the purpose of, because it's interesting and it's exciting and it might be interesting, So getting into your agentic use cases and then looking and thinking, well, aren't there any other reasons that I might want to talk to the same data, tools, systems, whatever it is you're calling? And the answer is almost always yes. Like, very rarely do I not want to have more than one way to I can't come up with other business use cases for wanting to talk. And that leads you to this almost like realization that it's probably worth, MCPing all the things. You know what I mean? Like, you get to the point where you're like, oh, okay, yes, it would be great to be able to update a record in Salesforce because a salesperson wants to do that. But it's also probably valuable that the sales operations person wants to do it, and they might want to do it for a different reason. And we're probably going to build them some tools, or they're going to build their own tools. I think thinking about things from less of a agents as hard-coded, lang graph kind of things, to more thinking about agents as some system prompt and some workflow plus MCPs is probably a very good pattern to start thinking in. It's very reusable. And, as you start to push more capabilities into something like Obot, an MCP gateway for your company, I think you're going to find a lot more people finding cool uses for those things that maybe you didn't even think of, because as IT, you're kind of waiting for someone to come to you with a problem to solve. Or as engineering, you're waiting for somebody to come with you with a problem to solve. And a lot of times, people don't even realize that those problems are solvable until you put them in their hands, the tools, and they start to wire up workflows to automatically, investigate new leads that come into the company, or automatically, review their competitors' blog for exciting new topics that they might want to think about, or whatever it is that you want to do. So I would lean in on, when the option exists, don't, build your integration as MCP because it's reusable and it's standardized. And it may not always, that doesn't mean always you just build some massive MCP. It could be a relatively, tailored small piece of code, but that thing could get reused in ways that you're not expecting, and publish it, share it, get it in front of more people.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you so much, and thank you so much for your time. Again, it's so great to hear some of the real lessons/tips for all the MCP developers and the MCP server builders. Again, I'm so excited about what you guys are doing on the MCP gateway, and then what you call it as Shadow AI or Shadow MCP problem for the IT organizations all over the world.